So when we talk about the deep truths of science and the new discoveries that are overturning 300 years of scientific assumption, what truths are we talking about really? I'd like to just give you a couple of examples. For me, one of the most profound of the deep truths is the idea that civilization is only about 5,000 years old. When I was in school, probably when you were in school, because I imagine we're all in the same age group, we're all within 50 years of one another, right? Or if you have children, if your children are in school today, we're being taught, your children are being taught that civilization is about 5,000 years old, that it began with ancient Sumeria and Mesopotamia about 5,000 years ago, and that civilization has evolved in a linear fashion from primitive, less advanced, to sophisticated technology, more advanced, one time only, a one-way direction. This is what the teachings of today now are saying to us. The problem with that is that the facts, the scientific peer-reviewed facts, no longer support this way of thinking, but the new facts are not being incorporated into the story of our past in the classrooms and in the textbooks. Scientific data is now pushing the evidence of advanced civilizations back well into the end of the last ice age, over 12,000 years ago, at least twice as old as what we're being led to believe. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for example, is now the archaeological site that is known to be the oldest scientifically proven, accepted, advanced civilization in the world today. There may be others, but this is the one that is scientifically validated right now. Göbekli Tepe is located in Turkey. It is a series of circular temple sites. 15 to 20 of those sites are still underground. They have been found through Earth imaging radar. 4 have been excavated so far. And these sites are now being dated at 13,500 years old, and they haven't even gotten to the oldest sites yet. And these are not primitive pole and grass huts. These are advanced archaeological, architectural structures. It is said there are no written records on the one hand. On the other hand, there are images that may very well prove to be hieroglyphs that are on this site. And what makes this site so interesting is that it was intentionally covered 8,000 years ago. So 8,000 years ago, the site was buried on purpose, preserving it until it was recovered in the 1990s. And this is only one site. If it were only one site, it could be an anomaly. But what scientists do when they find a discovery that doesn't fit the accepted story, they call it an anomaly, and they put it in a separate category, and they say, let's come back and study this later. Well, what's happening is there are so many anomalies that the anomalies now are becoming the new story. So Göbekli Tepe is the oldest scientifically proven site, 13,500 years old, but it's not alone. In the Gulf of Kambat, off the coast of India, underneath 120 feet of water, there is a city that has been discovered, and it's not a small city. It's 5 miles long, 2 miles wide, under 120 feet of water. And the theory says one of two things happened. Either the city was built underwater, which is possible but not likely, or the city was built on a coastline and then submerged when the sea levels rose. The sea levels rose when the ice melted at the end of the last ice age. The question is, who was here to build a 5 mile long, 2 mile wide city of advanced architecture and technology before the ice melted? We're looking at other sites. I have just come back from Peru, only within the last few weeks. And I personally had the opportunity to document the ancient site of Caral, C-A-R-A-L. Caral is now scientifically proven to be the oldest city in all of the Americas. It's older than the Maya, older than the Aztec, older than the Incan or the Olmec. It's rewriting the history of the Americas. It is an advanced civilization. 5 pyramids, 2 huge circular plazas covering 150 acres. All of this, when we think about this, these anomalies are now telling us a new story. And the story is that the history of our world as we know it today, the last 5,000 years, it's not the history of the whole world. It is the history of the most recent cycle of the world, a cycle that our ancestors called a great world age, 5,125 years long. On December 21st, 2012, we end the current world age and we begin a new one. And the world age that we're living in now began in August 11th of 3114 BC. That was 5,125 years ago. So the question is, why are we studying only the present cycle when the evidence shows there was a cycle before this one, at least one, possibly more? And here's why this is important. It means that humans lived through the changes in the earth and the climate in their time, in their cycle, that we're living now in our cycle. And if we have the wisdom to recognize this, we can learn from our ancestors. We can learn how they adapted or did not adapt to the changes. And the things that they did that worked for them, we can do in our time and do a lot of them. And the things that didn't work, we can stop doing them. This is one example of a deep truth. Another example, and perhaps the one that I am most passionate about right now, that's affected us the greatest. In 1859, Charles Darwin released a book, his first book he published, on the origin of species. And there are many assumptions that have been made in Darwin's work. Now, Darwin was a scientist, and I think he was probably a good scientist. In my opinion, the mistake that Charles Darwin made was he took observations that he made for some forms of life in one part of the world in his time, and he attempted to generalize them and apply them to all life everywhere, including human life. And the fact is that the facts do not support Darwin's theories, particularly when it comes to his theory of competition and survival of the fittest, interpreted as survival of the strongest. Since 1859, the scientific community has embraced this theory, survival of the strongest. And in Darwin's own words, he said that there is a general rule, a general law that applies to all life that he believed he saw, that specifically said that we are to multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. Let the strongest live and the weakest die. This is a dangerous way of thinking, because since 1859, about 150 years ago, a little over that now, the civilization of the world as we know it has been based on the scientific principles that were introduced during Darwin's time. And it's those principles that are the basis for the economic system that is collapsing on a global basis right now, for the corporate structures that work toward the bottom line of the dollar or the euro or the pound rather than what's good for people. It's this idea of survival of the fittest that has been twisted and distorted and used to justify some of the most horrific genocide of the 20th century. Adolf Hitler actually paraphrased Darwin to justify what happened in his ideas of the Holocaust of the 20th century. He didn't even give Darwin credit. Chairman Mao did give Darwin credit, and he quoted Darwin directly, and Chairman Mao said, because these are scientific principles, this justifies the horrid treatment that he was giving in the genocides during his time, and others have happened since then. So all of these things are important because it is showing us the places where the false assumptions now are catching up with us. The false assumptions of the last 100 or 150 years of economies and human relationships and our relationship to the earth, they may have worked in the short term for a brief period of time. They are not sustainable in the long term because they are based in false assumptions. So when we look at the world today, and this is what deep truth is all about, we see so many things that seem to be collapsing. For many people, it feels as if the world is falling apart for no apparent reason. If we look closely, however, what we'll see is this. The only things collapsing, the only things falling apart are the ways of thinking and the ways of living that are no longer sustainable in the presence of a changing world. This opens the door to the cycles and the choice points that allow us to choose again. But when we make those choices, they must be based upon the facts of our relationship to ourselves, first of all, and to other humans, and to this world, because if we make the new policies, if we pass the new laws and apply the new technology following the parameters and the ways of thinking that led to the crises that we're in right now, we are going to end up in precisely the same crises again. So this is why I'm very passionate about the book Deep Truth and this project of Choice Point. Choice points are cycles in places within the cycles of time where we have the opportunity for change. Cycles are nested. Some cycles are cosmic and last thousands of years. Some happen in our personal lives in a matter of hours or days or months. Some of the cycles deal with relationships of romance and passion or finance or health. Others deal with traditions of competition and the way that we think about either working together or competing with one another. But regardless of the nature of the cycle itself, all cycles follow general principles that are true across the board. And these truths are simply this. A cycle begins, any cycle begins with an event that sets into motion a pattern of energy that will continue and repeat on a rhythmic basis until something changes that pattern of energy. And every cycle ends with a period of time before the next cycle begins again. There's a period of time where neither exist. That is the choice point. Our indigenous ancestors talked to us about the moment between the inhale and the exhale when there is no breath. They talked to us about the crack between the worlds, the time at the end of the day when the sun has set. So it is technically no longer daytime, but it's still light, so it's not yet night. The crack between the worlds, in between the day and the night. These are when they said our prayers would be the most powerful. These are the choice points in our lives and examples of the indigenous wisdom of these choice points. If we can embrace the understanding that choice points exist, and we can recognize that we are in a global choice point right now. The collapse of the systems has opened the doors to the global choice points. And so many are converging in a small window of time. I think it can be no accident that the economic crises of the world are pushing us to understand our relationship to economics and what's good for people. That the growing threat of a global war on the horizon, it's a tremendous energy pushing for a global war because there's a belief that war is good for commerce, that it's good for economies. Well, we also know that peace is good for the economy, and peace can be its own viable economy if we embrace the deepest truths of our existence. The idea that civilization is cyclic and repeats under the conditions similar to what we're living right now. This is a very different way for the West to think about our relationship to the past. But when we bring all of these together, are the ideas of our past ancient? The answer is yes. Are they obsolete? The answer is no. There's a continuity that exists between our past and the present. And the choice points that come up again and again are now our opportunity. It's like a global reset, a reality check, to look at the things that have worked in our lives. And the things that have worked, embrace them and do a lot of them. And the things that haven't worked, let's stop doing them, because we know they don't work. Now is the time to embrace our relationship to the cycles and this great choice point, the great choice point that faces us all now. So I personally would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's watching this film right now. I want to thank you for your courage to live at this rare, pivotal, precious moment in the history of our world, and for the lives that you have lived, and that for all you are doing right now to help us to become better people and to create a better world. I cannot help but believe that future generations will look back on this generation, and I believe that they will say that you and I are the generation that embraced the choice points and the opportunity to tip the scales of life and peace in our favor. That this is the generation that forever walked away from war as a way to solve our problems, and a generation that began to think of the borders that divide us as nations in a very, very different way. It doesn't mean they need to divide our hearts and the achievements that we have made together as a civilization. So for your role in supporting all of these things, I give deep gratitude and thanks, and thank you for supporting Choice Point.